Welcome to this session on socially responsible investments. As we all knew all the time that investments actually are for social good. But nowadays, there is a separate discipline and separate set of investors who only invest into socially responsible businesses and actions. Our panel today, consisting of a number of bankers, businesses, and bottom of the pyramid entrepreneurs, are going to discuss what are the problems in funding the socially responsible businesses in India. A number of our social ventures wants to invest into the bottom of the pyramid. They want to provide education to the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor. They want to provide health and sanitation facilities to drinking water to the urban poor. But when they approach the bankers, they would say that you are entering into a very risky business. The normal investors are very well used to those parameters of evaluating an investment. So socially responsible investments are those investments which look more at social good than the normal parameters of investment. Our panel will inform you through their deliberations on variety of issues that the socially responsible investments look at normally and what is their state of art today of evaluating the projects and what are the problems that the social ventures are facing or bottom of the pyramid investors are facing. I welcome all of you to join and enjoy the deliberations that go on further.
Investment which is made under the principles, or there are, to talk about first, that there are some established principles of sustainable investing, sustainable and responsible investing, SRI, and these have been established by various bodies including the UN, including PRI, and these principles lay down how and in what manner can investments get classified as SRI investments. Also, as you heard in the film, that any investment could be classified as a responsible investment as long as it fits into these principles. It could belong to any industry. But specifically those investments which, in addition to being responsible investments from a corporate governance perspective, those investments which adhere to or those companies and businesses that adhere to investing in the environmental space, in the energy efficiency space, and I'm giving a few examples here to illustrate what means a sustainable investment. All investments in these space are in addition referred to as sustainable and responsible investments. So our panel today will focus its energies in talking about investing in the sustainability area. And as I was saying that in terms of laying down a broad definition for what is defined as an SRI investment, any investment which is made following the principles of environmental, social and corporate governance as laid down and well understood by various forums and bodies across the world get classified as SRI investments. And I think it's very important to understand that there has been a lot of interest generated in this area. Right now, a large part of this interest is at investor level. There are a number of institutions like PRI, which is a group of financial investors that have come together and signed on to these PRI principles and have agreed to commit capital according to the PRI principles laid down by PRI as well as United Nations. But there are also a number of other investors who may not have signed on to these practices, yet have, yet follow their own method of, evaluating ethical and social investments, ethical and sustainable investments. So it's not necessary that these have to only follow the particular principle which is laid down by the various bodies, but these could also be, methods and methodologies and principles developed inherently by any organization which tries to carry out these type of investments. So today we'll focus, as I said, our energies on looking at specifically sustainable investments as an area. And to do that, to help us do that, we have a very good panel here. So let's talk a little bit about which type of investments, which type of projects, what type of companies, what kind of businesses will fall under the classical definition of sustainability and responsibility. And Umesh, if I can begin with you, Could you talk a little bit about, as you have been advising extensively in this sector, you worked with a financial institution as well, how does the market, the market perceive sustainability? What are the sectors which would typically fall under these areas from a spectrum of social investments, going right up to environmental investments?
Sure, happy to do that, Vivek. In fact, I would like to offer two views to this audience, and I leave you to make your own decision on what view is the best. Idealistically speaking, in an ideal world, there should not be anything called social entrepreneurship or social venture investing, because if you are a commercial venture, if you do your business right, you are a social venture as well. So allow that point to stay with you. So then comes the question of, if most of what we see around us as the commercial world is non-sustainable, then what is sustainable? And why do then pension funds need to invest in something called socially responsible investing? So I believe this is pretty much the kind of bandaging mechanism which we see, where we are not proactive. Let's say if you take the health as a sector, and we are more reactive. So you have post-treatment or post-facto scenarios ruling the roost. But having said so, I think in India, the advent of microfinance started teaching people, and I started microfinance for HSBC Bank, so I know the kind of troubles we went through to even get people to understand why do microfinance, how poor are bankable. C.K. Prahlad's, the late C.K. Prahlad's pioneering work on future at the bottom, the fortune at the bottom of pyramid. Those are kind of thought leadership scenarios which compel people to look at taking their balance sheets to people who perhaps had low purchasing power, but creating products and services which met this purchasing power in a way in which it became environmentally effective, socially useful, and commercially profitable as well. So from that perspective, in terms of sectoral definition, you had microfinance or rural credit or urban credit for the bottom of pyramid masses emerging as a really strong sector. There were many, many ways in which entrepreneurs looked at then tackling the bottom of pyramid market, and looked at water, for example, which is a burgeoning sector. Most of the sectors which we see, and I think Vivek would agree with me when I say that, are in the mitigation space. So solar gets talked about, geothermal gets talked about. Coming to the entire issue of climate change, you don't get much of sectoral interventions being talked about in the adaptation space. So I won't get a socially responsible investing fund manager who says that I won't invest because indigenous people are getting affected. So we have been talking about, and the famous JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley report which talked about poverty as an asset class. And I think that was a dramatic shift which happened in thinking, that people thought, oh, poverty is no longer a liability, poverty is an asset, because you can create so many opportunities moving forward to invest into this asset class. So I think the definitions are fine, the intention is fine, but when it comes to sectoral interventions, you rarely see the entire gamut of adaptation sectors opening up. We see lots in the area of solar, we see lots in the area of renewable energy. I know there too there have been problems. We aren't really getting the fair share of pricing in place so as to get investors return on fair returns on their share of investment. So from the sustainability perspective, the views which I have to offer to this audience is perhaps you as a corporation, if you decide to create your products and services in an ethical manner, respecting norms of transparency, respecting norms of anti-corruption, respecting the rights of communities, speaking the language of human rights perhaps, then you are actually doing socially responsible investing, because you're creating products and services through your own proprietary investment model of your balance sheet and creating impact on ground. And for investors who would use screens, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it as we go along, it's a question of which company do you invest in, which meets at least some amount of materially measurable, socially responsible behavioral standards. And that could mean having a plant or operation which is certified environmentally speaking, or not having child labor in your factories. So these are emerging standards. And I think my only contention at this stage, and I'm sure we can talk more as we go along, is the fact that we have socially responsible investing standards for a set of the corporations or projects which we have on the ground today, but the majority would not want to even look at these standards as something feasible or important, because then it's business as usual. And I asked this question to a legendary investor out of Texas one fine evening when I was teaching at Yale University, that if a university company says to you, saying that I've been giving you 30% year-on-year returns, now you know what, I've decided to be environmentally friendly, so I would give you only 5% because balance is getting invested in environmental work. Would you still invest? The answer was no. So that's the problem, and I hope we can throw some light on this during the discussion.
Right. I think if we stick to you for a moment, What we hear from you is that A, this definition is something which is work in progress. It is still being developed. The sectors and the areas it applies to are expanding by the day, because anything and everything can be classified as sustainable and responsible. And investors, while they have sets of principles, are not really sure, what do they want out of this? Are they looking for people and planet, or are they looking for profit, or all the three things, people, planet, profit? So as you look at, as the audience looks at this particular area, as some people who might be entrepreneurs or advisors or even with corporates, how do they classify their own business? When they look at their business, what should they do? Is there available some kind of a standard they can go and check themselves on and say that, okay, we fall well into this bracket and therefore we can be called sustainable and therefore pitch ourselves as sustainable business? Or it's loose enough that you could actually build the definition, you can greenwash, as is often claimed, that you can actually use these definitions to greenwash your business. What's your view on this very broadly?
It's a very interesting question, Vivek. You talked about a triple bottom line approach of people, planet, and profits, and it's very pertinent to understand what comes first, or all three go together. Clearly, if all three decide to go together, you would never get a product out to the market and be able to sell it, and that's the reality. The related aspect is no business today internalizes cost of environmental management or running a socially relevant business into their operations before taking a product or service out to the market. So we are under pressures of incremental returns as an economy, as a globally structured capitalistic world, so on and so forth. So clearly it will be a case, at least to begin with, of a post-facto application of principles of sustainability to the world of bottom of pyramid markets or to the world of creating sustainable products and services. But if you decide, the other day I was speaking to somebody who asked me the same question, we would like to triple bottom line, so we would like to do social, environmental, commercial performance. How do we do it? And I think the answers are in front of us. If you combine the GRI guidelines, and Dr. Rambab, we have been talking about the 70-odd economic and social indicators, you take the ISO 26000 and you build in the national voluntary guidelines for good measure into it, and you will see all that you need to do as a business. And the national voluntary guidelines also apply to SMEs. So we're not letting them go out of the room, so to speak, and then say that, okay, you don't matter because, you can do what you want to do, pollute the Ganges. No. We need to get these people also into the fold. And if you combine these three standards together, and I love these frameworks because I'm doing my own research of how I can use those frameworks not to report. Reporting can be 40 years down the line, but to create a market for environmentally and socially responsible companies. So I would start by using such frameworks to be able to create a product and service platform which meets the entire aspect of doing business in a good manner.
Thank you. Usha, I'll pick on a point which Unmesh mentioned. The institutions, particularly development institutions, have been at the forefront of the wave of sustainability, whether it be establishing the SRI principles where UN led the way, supported by development institutions, or even funding such projects. They have been at the forefront. Now, as Unmesh has looked at the definition, how do the institutions look at this definition? Are your definitions more rigid? Because this leads to and this will lead to a question later on which I'll come to you, that in spite of having a very clear framework, we don't see investments flowing in. So how do institutions actually look at this sector? What do they define as sustainability? How do they evaluate deals and call them sustainable? If you can shed a little bit light on this.
Well, actually, it's quite a debatable question to begin with. Sustainability. Yes, that's true. I think sustainability can be viewed from different perspectives, and I think what was really coming out from this morning, the initial introductory the presentation of the research findings, I think the shifting from stockholder to stakeholders, right? So I think the stakeholder perspectives for sustainability will be very, very different from different stakeholders' point of view. What I can definitely talk about here from the sustainability perspective of KfW is that there is no clear definition per se, but we are into financing and we are into development. So if you really take these two aspects independently, you will see that you can only finance if the business is going to be sustainable. And then you have to question what is this business? Is this business is going to be sustainable? It's in the sustainability sector. So this is the kind of you can say a dichotomy or a dilemma that it always has to be analyzed from two perspectives. One from the stakeholders' perspective and from the sector's perspective and also from the business perspective as well. So. Having said that, I would like to highlight some of the facts which are there for KFW. In fact, in 2011, we were the 6th largest promoter of renewable energy projects worldwide. We have invested something like 22 billion in the area of climate protection. Projects that really address the climate change issues, and which is roughly 1/3 of our financing. So in terms of the sectors, the question that you actually asked, I think we really look into these sectors as the sustainability sector for us. And being a signatory to the PRI, the UN PRI, I think we have integrated all the ESG principles into our own decision making. Now, the question on how we implement it and to get into the details, I think probably this is not the place, but I would just give a very small example. For example, a biomass project, right? A biomass project could be it's a renewable energy project. It's also a sustainability project which creates employment and for the rural livelihoods and so on. But the question that we really have to ask at a very field level is that where from the biomass is coming? I mean, is it coming from sustainable sources, whether it is really sustainable, whether it is not impacting the biodiversity issues, and then of course from the input issues, we have to then move into the organizational issues. Which this corporate entity, is it really having a good governance structure? Are they? We have to move from all aspects, but then finally this business has to be sustainable. So I think these elements in practice again would vary depending on the type of the project and the type of the stakeholders, but I think overall, I think these are part and parcel of our processes that we have imbibed in our decision making and in our investments.
Well, thanks for this. I'm trying to understand this a bit. So we have a statement from Unmesh that there are 3 levels of principle, and what an individual who is a promoter of a business or even a corporate entity or an SME has to do is to look at these in totality and judge for himself where he stands on these to decide whether or not he's a sustainable business. We have a institutional framework where institutions which are signatories to PRIs, to things like PRI, have integrated these principles into their approach of evaluating projects. And in your opinion, sustainability not only is in the way he does his business, but also typically in his supply chain. Right from a supply chain point onwards, he's got to be sustainable. So if I can turn to you, Satish, before I come back to Usha. You are an advisor who works with corporate entities to raise funding or to help them define their projects. How do you look at this plethora of requirements between, let's say, the way sustainability is defined and between the way institutions which typically fund sustainability look at it? How do you help the clients choose what is the best path for them? Because I think one of the fundamental drivers of getting yourself, other than of course the satisfaction of knowing that you are contributing to environment, contributing to society, one of the key drivers, and we are addressing here a session on investments, one of the key drivers of getting yourself classified as a sustainable business is to get access to global funding, which is available for sustainable businesses. So how would you, in your experience, how have you led the clients through these plethora of rules and guidelines? What's been your experience in terms of helping them define the sustainability angle of their businesses?
Okay, defining the sustainability angle in a business varies a great extent from where you are in terms of large cap, mid cap, small cap, to the entrepreneurial initiatives, which I would call to new ventures, for example. Clearly the larger players who are listed on the exchange, etc., have already tasted a bit of it from a governance angle. As they got listed, the various exchanges have put certain requirements which have at least, I wouldn't say, which have at least introduced them to governance. I'm trying to be a little mild on the whole thing.
Thank you for being so nice.
Okay, so now beyond the introduction, the ability to go forward is a call that each organization has taken based on how they want to approach it. The entire framework, whether it be the GRI, whether it be a matter of sustainability reporting, is almost, as Unmesh also said, clearly driven to a great extent top-down. Clearly, as management sees the need to move towards these initiatives, as the board directs them, we are seeing various clients or various large corporates take these concepts in two ways. One, let me get this done. I want an implementation, I want a certificate. Guys, get it done. And the other extent being, I want to imbibe these principles into the true thought process of my teams and into myself. Now, that's a completely different path both of these players take, and we're seeing both kinds of players. Now, I don't hold any of those players who look for the certification, hold it against them, because I think in the process there is enough in the team and enough of learning that's happening, and it's not necessarily that the top level has to take a call on sustainability. Even a manager or a plant manager taking calls which changes the way he thinks, which changes his approach towards procurement, changes his health, safety related decisions, is doing something significant. So while the drive may be for the certificate, we still believe that there are enough movers who are learning as part of this process, and therefore there is an initiative. And that's something to ride upon, because it's always great that people are driving an initiative, some with different reasons, but it's happening. At the other extreme, moving away from these listed players more to the new venture players, we are seeing a lot of interest for small players now. Let's just take biogasification, or a well talked about area where we've heard of Husk Power on various forums where they've looked at decentralized power generation. Investors are seeing, one, that there is a market at the bottom of the pyramid. There are players who are willing to structure transactions at that. Two, there are challenges first for an investor to invest primarily because of scale. The moment you talk about each such project, the investor says, you know, any project or any investment of mine involves a cost structure which at the back end itself is about 300,000-400,000 US dollars to evaluate the company, to make sure I've done my due diligence, to make sure I've structured the agreement, to make sure I've given the funds, and I have the investment manager to look into it. So clearly many of these entrepreneurial initiatives, to be able to draw upon these sustainable funds, have a huge challenge. They need to suddenly try and demonstrate a size and scale which would take them time. So getting a sustainable business on a scale which is implementable in one area, then trying to show a model that it can be replicated across, and then drawing upon funds and proving that the funds are going to be utilized and the model is completely replicable, is a huge challenge. And we see many players who have managed to overcome the challenge by customizing, adopting, changing their technology, changing their play. So even many of these players have moved from one model to another to be able to take upon the capital, because the capital forced them to look at a size and scale which required changes in their business model. So there have been various stories of players who have taken upon sustainability capital and have been able to deploy it, work with their teams. And there have been others who realized that in order to get the capital, we as a company can no longer be able to service the bottom of the pyramid. We may actually have to go away from our original business plan, because that's the only way we are going to be able to draw upon that whole capital. So if you look at biomass-based power generation, we've moved from a model where earlier it was aimed at decentralized to a point where all of the players who took upon the capital suddenly went to a scale saying, I want 10 megawatt, I want 20 megawatt at a site, and thereby created a model which was not sustainable. They needed 70,000 tons of biomass, which was something you needed to go across 5 districts to get. And you were held up. I mean, you had a classical case when the farmer realized that you had no choice but to pay, number one. Second, you had a model where you needed that raw material. And now we're going back, and many of these players are rethinking. Maybe instead of going from 1 to 10, I should have put up a large number of 1 megawatt projects. It would have been sustainable as a business. It would have been sustainable from the point of view of being able to draw upon the capital. So you could say that that's an example of where capital spoiled a sustainable business by forcing it to try and go to a scale which it just wasn't built for. So there is capital, a lot of capital is now asking the right questions in terms of sustainability. Gone are the days when, the basic question was, am I going to enter into something which is going to be a PR mess for me tomorrow? Have we just bought land from a guy who's, related to some bhai who's related to someone else? It's gone beyond that. Investors are looking at the next level, and clearly that itself is a step forward from the point of view of looking at it as sustainable investments. Now, taking that lead to, leveraging all of that $1 trillion plus capital, I think a lot will go along the way, and businesses will also have to adopt.
So I hear a bit of a dichotomy here, which is that businesses at scale may not necessarily address all aspects of sustainability, but then you have to create scale to be able to attract capital. So let's turn to this aspect in terms of how institutional capital is oriented. Before we go to the specific sectors and talk about it, I think it's here, perhaps I'd like you to come in, Usha, and talk a little bit about how is capital oriented in this sector. We're talking about sustainably responsible investments, and investors, have to grapple with the issue of scale versus provision of sustainability, number one. There are varying plethora of guidelines. What do you think are the big challenges in the investment aspect of sustainability, in the investor aspect? How critical is the institutional aspect here? How critical is institutional capital in this area? Can there not be funds which are in regular stream of doing investments? Can they not come in and invest into these type of projects, or you require special understanding, you require special knowledge of these areas to be able to invest into them?
In fact, if you really look at most of the developmental institutions financing, there's always a component called technical assistance. In fact, this technical assistance component is basically to address the various issues or challenges that are there to have this funds flow into specific projects. So in a way, these are actually packaged to, or it already recognizes, and it is integral part of the lending from the development institutions. But the question again remains is, as very rightly pointed out by Satish, that yes, the scale is really important for for any investment. And once we look into the scale, it is really difficult to go into very far-reaching stages of assessing how much this investment would be sustainable and under what principles these would be implemented. So I think it becomes a bit of a long-drawn processes, and many a time I think the key consideration is the transaction costs. I think again rightly pointed out by Satish is that, small entrepreneurs or small-scale projects which are supposedly more sustainable, they have to face this challenge of the high transaction costs, the access to sustainable funds or the lending from the institutions. But on the other hand, I think it's also very critical that for implementing sustainable development projects or sustainable projects and in sustainable sectors, where are the institutions? At the grassroots, we always, I think, at the end, we only hear case study institutions. We are yet to come up with an institution on which is at a scale which is implementing such projects on a scale which attracts institutions to invest capital there. So I think and one of the reasons for the lack of institutions or limited capacity of the institution is that these sustainable projects, it's just not a project, it is a process by itself. I think the whole sustainability process itself requires specific capacities, skills, and also time to really implement. And therefore, in many of the cases, I think the institutions, although they come up with brilliant idea, when they try to translate into reality, I think one, the time is away, or maybe the framework, the policy or the regulatory framework is not in place, or the market is not ready. Again, I want to take the example of biomass projects. Many of the off-grid biomass projects, they really face the sustainability, because where is the load, or where is the demand for energy in those areas? So I think the institutions then have to play a role of developing the demand there, developing the load, they're developing the need for or the demand for their services. So it really goes from a normal business to integrating into many other aspects, and therefore it becomes so holistic or so integrated, or it's comprehensive that it's many times it becomes unviable from the investor's point of view.
So what I hear from both of you is, A, in the current market, there exists a dichotomy, as in smaller businesses which might be truly more sustainable in their approach to the way they are solving a problem or providing a solution, are unable to access funding because of scale. Institutions are unable to provide funding to these small projects, again because of scale, because of their transactional costs, or for the size of the institution, these kind of deals are too small, or they may not fit into the framework of the institution as it evaluates and addresses the issue of investment. So, Unmesh, if I may turn to you quickly on this. You work with HSBC and now you are an independent consultant. Could you share your experience, sort of picking up from where both Satish and Usha have left it, that there seems to be a gap in the market. There are a lot of interested entrepreneurs, but their ability to access capital is thwarted, let's say, by the nature of the institutional framework, or let's say the absence of the institutional framework to provide that capital, and the preset notions, let us say, if the investors have of looking at scale or size. So investors, what I hear from this side is investors are not yet geared to provide capital the way sustainability truly needs capital. What's your experience of having worked through a financial institution and now being an independent advisor?
It's a very useful insight, and I agree with you that indeed the investors aren't geared up to be able to look at sustainability as a sector. Your very few names, Acumen Fund popularized the entire notion of patient capital, but microfinance in a way destroyed the entire notion of scale, because that's one sector which rode high on the principles of acceleration, incremental sales, and having lots of customers at the bottom of pyramid exposed to many lenders, micro lenders. So you almost had a subprime debt bubble at the grassroots economy, which actually led to many microfinance institutions coming under the ambit of a really draconian Andhra Pradesh government regulation. So scale when it comes to, let's say, a concentrated market like Mumbai is fine, because Mumbai, you beg, borrow, steal, you will make money and buy the product which is being advertised to you. So Mumbai will always be your strong market amongst others, let's say metros or even tier 2, tier 3 cities. But when you look at socially relevant products, I think the politics of the geography comes into the picture. I know companies in the water sector today who are unable to scale because certainly the Gram Panchayat feels that water is a natural resource and God given, can't pay you money, sorry. But if you go and see Katrina Kaif advertising a Bisleri or a Pep or some other Aquafina water of brand, that same product will be bought at 20 times the price. So the entire aspect of imagery also comes into the picture. Who has resources to promote what? Because as a social entrepreneur, I do not promote my brand in a way in which a large competition would, and therefore I do not get the necessary eyeballs, or I do not get necessary customers, so I won't be able to scale. So I can only scale with the local grassroots taking into consideration the geopolitical risks, the risks of community, risk of local politics, so on and so forth. So clearly I agree that we need a notion of what I call patient returns. Patient capital is fine and you give it slowly, but you also expect it back slowly. So there is a need to look at in what ways could we convert the entire expectation of returns. I still know funds who have been structured as early as 2 years ago through investments from development finance institutions who are asking 30% IRR on their investment. And it all looks very good commercially, because clearly the definition also is a matter of concern, right? Because a venture capital or a private equity fund by definition is a rocket fuel. You can put it in the auto rickshaw. Like one of my dear friends always gives this example, and all social entrepreneurships is an auto rickshaw. It's like a small, two-wheeler into which you're trying to pump that money. So perhaps on the other side, social entrepreneurs aren't ready for venture capital, because you give a fantastic example of biomass. Tomorrow, people will grow rice just to give rice husk to the biomass companies, not because it's a staple food to be coming across the board as a nutritional dietary input, so on and so forth. So these understandings aren't there with the investors. These understandings aren't there in terms of an institutional framework. And perhaps many times I wonder whether the investors have their own ESG thinking in place before they go out and invest into investee companies on the ground and define their ESG thinking for them. So it's a work in progress. There are many investors who understand this. They're trying to change this as we go along, but you could count them on the tip of your fingers.
So what one hears is really that the investor community, of course, the investor community is not fully ready for it, but at the same time, what I hear you say, and also taking a point from where Satish talked about it, that the entrepreneurs themselves have actually either to access capital or in their, let's call it greed, to reach out to the sources of capital, plus with their lack of understanding, they've actually distorted the market. Do I get you correctly?
Absolutely.
So it's a role played by both the sides.
True.
Is what you are saying.
Yes.
Ashish, you're an entrepreneur. Let me bring you in here. You've heard an advisor speak about how the market has become distorted, partly because of the way businesses have structured themselves to access capital. So their source focus within sustainability space seemed to be, let's ride the wave of sustainability to get capital. They haven't thought through their plans properly. And those who have thought through their plans properly and are trying to build grassroots-based businesses which are truly sustainable, between Usha and Satish, you heard them say they are not able to access capital. And Unmesh kind of put an emphasis that these entrepreneurs have not prepared themselves. The smaller entrepreneur, the grassroots entrepreneur, even if he is sustainable, he hasn't prepared himself to access capital. What's your view on this? Do you really think the shortcoming is at the investor end, or are investees or are companies which are looking for capital not ready, or is it a mix of these two? What's your personal experience? You are in the process of developing a business. You are talking to investors. What's your view on this?
Sure. It's an interesting question. Actually, reality is always a mixed bag, right? There will be all kinds of scenarios, and the answer will be yes to each of these scenarios, depending on the case, right? So there is no one answer, but I'll tell you what briefly we have experienced so far. We haven't quite tried proactively to raise capital. So far we've been self-funded, just promoters funding ourselves, right? However, here what is important is like what fit exists between the fund, what complementary skills the fund brings to the table, the investor brings to the table versus what we have. So many times we get a feeling that compared to the developed economies, in India the investors are not very mature. All they have is money and not necessarily the contacts, the smart money, if you will, right? To take, especially we focus on the bottom of pyramid, okay? So for bottom of pyramid businesses, whatever it takes to scale it up. See, we are good at technology, but not necessarily good at scaling up so far. So we would like an investor to bring these complementary skills to the table, so as to take the venture forward in the interest of people, planet, and profit, all three, right? But that fit seems to be lacking many a time. So it's not like one is missing versus another. So that it's a mixed bag so far. Another, if I may, there's one more aspect to it, which is two more, which is the exit strategy. A lot of the investors want a certain type of exit, and the return they expect from the exit is usually very similar to a purely for-profit entity. And we as a socially focused business, okay, just give you a debrief. We make the longest lasting solar lamps in the world. So the kind of quality of parts we use are pretty expensive, but our price is a little bit lower than the competition. So you can expect our margins to be a lot lower than other funded. And I don't want to take names, but they are some of the companies funded by so-called patient capital funds, okay? So the point is, if you are truly a social venture, you would have your margins already small, and you would not be able to give the kind of exits and the kind of returns that investors expect. And investors, so far, we have found is, I'm sure there are exceptions, but so far we have found is, they're very similar to the purely for-profit investors. And so there's that balancing act. And so on one hand, you don't want to compromise on your philosophy of being green, being good. And on the other, you cannot, so therefore you cannot charge as much margins and then cannot give that much return. So that covers pretty much what I had to say.
This is very, very interesting. So what I hear is that, and if I can sort of bring this to a single point, that the investment community, whether you call it lack of smart money being available or operational skills in terms of helping projects like you scale up, or whether as Unmesh and Satish and Usha have made the point that the investment community is not geared to support small projects and not geared to understand the philosophy and work with these small entrepreneurs to develop their projects. So if I can sort of use this point and springboard us into our next discussion. I'm the only investor amongst all of you, but as I said, I come from commercial space. Umesh, can we talk a little bit about, and you did touch upon it, that the entire fault does not lie at the investor's end. And again, we are not searching faults here, but there's a very pertinent comment which Ashish made. Could you react to it from an investor's perspective? You have been in HSBC, you have been in an institution which has looked at doing these kind of deals. Is there smart money around? Do you believe that there is capital which not only can help an entrepreneur fund himself, but also provide him operational expertise to scale himself? You did talk about Acumen, you did talk about a few funds who have tried to do this, but there seems to be general lack of this type of capital. The consensus seems to be there is general lack of this capital. So if you can comment a little bit on it, and then I'll go to Usha to talk about development capital.
So clearly there is a need to empower both entrepreneurs and investors with the right kind of knowledge. And to connect with all that has been discussed at this conclave so far, there is a interesting connector available to corporations in terms of corporate social responsibility budgets. Where do you put that money? One, you put it into charity because perhaps it offsets your sins. Two, you put it into building capacities, which is what I try to do at HSBC, of social entrepreneurs. So what are the needs there, and why do they fail when they come to the table? A business plan, how to write a business plan which is really an effective business plan, because ultimately it's a forecast. So you can't beat to death a forecast and say that you will do it because you're idealistic. So a social entrepreneur sells an idea or a product based on idealism, which reflects in the business plan also, which is very funny. We can't see a business plan which is idealism into it, because even the figures are idealistic. Right. So that dose of practicality needs to be built in. Two is the entire understanding of purchasing power, which is not there. I mean, I remember during my advertising agency days, when we used to handle Unilever as one of our large clients, all of us used to do what is called a purchasing power mapping. Where would we market the product? Tier 2 towns, Tier 3 towns, 5,000 population villages, which districts, so on and so forth. So the market sizing is something which entrepreneurs haven't been really doing well, primarily from the social and environmental products perspective. And I think if these two things aren't being done well in terms of a realistic business plan and the market positioning and pricing, then what you're actually selling is a theory. It's not something which an investor will want to invest into. So I think we need to get towards doing that. Corporations have a large role, which is what we did when we asked our employee volunteers to unleash their banking thinking into helping entrepreneurs think like a business person, but not go towards scale, because then you know what happens, but gradually go towards it. So a lot of capacity building is required. And I think where I'm also coming from is the fact that in terms of looking practical instruments, we all know that all funds have an investment philosophy, and that's a very practical instrument to teach the investors or the funds and their investors that how do you create an investment philosophy which builds in principles of sustainability. You can say early stage, mid stage, later stage, whatever it is, deal stage agnostic and whatnot, but how do you really use that investment philosophy to create a workshop for ideas for both the entrepreneurs and the investors into a fund to see that how do they really create impact which gradually creates profits and not runaway profits? Because this way you're actually hedging the risks of runaway profit. So yes, entrepreneurs need to know more in terms of effectively building blocks which are practical, but I think they will need to be handheld by investors who don't come with a Western way of thinking that money could be made if you invest it right. You have to go beyond that to look at the ethical angle as well.
So what I hear you say is, yes, some amount of proactive work is needed at investor end, but there is also a big gap missing at potential projects and potential entrepreneurs in terms of raising money. So before I come to you, Usha, I want to bring Satish on this. You bring in an advisor's thought on this. You heard Unmesh talk about the missing aspect in an entrepreneur, the lack of preparation. What has been your experience in this area as you work with entrepreneurs? Do you agree with Unmesh that yes, while there is obviously a lot to be done on the capital provision side, there also needs to be a lot done on the entrepreneur side to be able to access capital?
Truly, a lot needs to be done on the entrepreneurial side, but let's take a few examples to understand what's happening. Let's take, for example, solar lantern space, because we have Ashish here who can, in the last 3 years odd, there would be at least 30 to 40 companies which have come out in this space. Quite a few of them I would say, have all of their, let me put it, the checkbox of strong resumes are there in at least 10 of them. So I would say at least there is a basic building block to build a business plan. You've gone to an IIM, you've gone to a top international school, etc. We'll give them that much to say that they have. So there are at least 10 players in the lighting space itself who have a strong skill set in business management with some amount of industrial experience and have the ability and the connect and the network to draw up a reasonable business plan. The number of schemes and benefits available or schemes available to get funding, if you look at from the government side itself, there are reasonable number of schemes, but a large section of this scheme requires you to move away from the thought process of I will write my report and get the marks to how will I work the system to get what I want. Now, so while there is, for example, a very simple scheme called the CGT MSE scheme. It's called the collateral free scheme for medium and small enterprises. It is up to 1 crore for a small and medium enterprise without collateral. Okay, so it's a very strong scheme, well promoted. But guess who are the only people who lend against the scheme? Come on, no rocket science here, only the PSU banks. At least 3-4 people who we know who have worked with have tried to go to their respective bankers. And the first thing they realized was, oh man, I'm working with ICICI Bank or Yes Bank or ING Vysya, and these guys don't know anything about it. So the first thing, most of these entrepreneurs who ticked the first box, which was, we said, have good background in resume strength, suddenly realize they're working with a set of institutions who don't really know how to take or work with these schemes which are sponsored by the government. So when they came to this, then they realized, oh God, now I need to go to State Bank of Travancore or Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur and now discuss with the bank manager. And they're like, dude, I have no connect with that branch manager. He's in his own world. He says, collateral kya hai? He says, scheme hai, ho sakta hai. So when you go into that PSU bank and try and tell them that this scheme exists, they are currently doing business in so many crores that he says, what? 80 lakhs? You entrepreneur, new scheme? I don't know. So he says, it took, I know 2 people who have succeeded in taking money on that scheme. So I actually think I should worship them. They should be part of the list of people. But it took quite a bit of pain. It took quite a lot of effort for them to leave all of those resume skills and bring in a man in their team who knew actually how to get work done. So a lot of what we say on the one side is the skill sets by which you can, write up that business plan. In India, when you go to the implementation, all of those skill sets in a great way become your, the stone around your neck, your millstone. So the next stage, a lot of these sustainable or social investing or enterprises take up projects which are primarily government-based or funding-based or grant-based. Once again, the skill set that you need to attack a grant-based organization, which is, let's say, in some way quasi-governmental, or for that matter, go for this whole scheme, get a government contract, is completely counter to the previous skill set that we needed to start the business. Because the moment you want to get into that realm of talking to, how many of those social entrepreneurs in my initial list on the lamps actually have met a district collector or have actually met a chief engineer, for example, and can create a discussion with him which will result in him understanding your business plan. So there is a significant, not many can do it, and there is therefore a significant disconnect. So quite a bit of our social entrepreneurs reach a stage where they say, I just don't think I can work with the government infrastructure. I clearly have to go to an enterprise which is either of that list of top 10, they're going to say either I figure out a way to work without government grant and government funding, or you come to the remaining 30 who say, boss, I don't know what a product is, I don't know what a business plan is, but I know something else. I know how to get that grant out, and I will figure out a way to run my product. So indirectly now, this contradicts our initial thought process of the guy who has a reasonably strong product, a business plan, doesn't know how to implement it. The guy who may not necessarily have a strong business plan and a strong product is the guy who has the funds. So
this is very interesting. You've actually brought a practical sort of outlook into this discussion. There are people who know how to play the system, and then there are people who know how to write business plans. And therefore there are gaps which exist at the entrepreneur end. Now, is there a desire, do you see in the market between you two as advisors, a desire for entrepreneurs to move out, or is the gap because they can't afford to move out to advisors who can help them bridge that gap? How do you see, how can this gap be bridged is the question.
Okay. See, a number of organizations, some of which we're also working with, let it be TIE, there's another ICANN, then there's a New Ventures. So a number of such bodies have come into play who are trying to facilitate this entire process. And they are responsible to a great extent to get a lot more of the stronger business plan players into the social enterprise, okay? They are promoting it, they are doing the necessary steps. So there is a lot of people who I know from my own batch who have become entrepreneurs, and I know that when I compare it with other batches 10 years ahead of me, that number was much lower. So over the last few years, whether it be in this space or in other spaces, entrepreneurism on the whole has increased. At least that's my litmus or my assessment. So clearly there is something in the system which is going right. The second step is also something that I'm realizing is after spending a bit of time, those top 10 people who I put in as, are figuring out how to work with the new system. So in order to be sustainable, you need to adapt to the environment, and that's happening. But unfortunately, it's not happening at the pace at which we want it. There are a number of these players who have morphed, who have adapted, who have figured out how to work on government projects. A lot of the enterprises in the solar side, for example, which have managed to grow over the last few years, have depended on being able to work with government to start those first few projects, because those pilot projects were primarily driven by government. Private parties are only now considering, can I do solar applications on a larger scale? So it has happened, and a lot of bodies are facilitating it. So whether the CGT MSc scheme that I talked to you about, today there are a number of conferences on entrepreneurialism where we see those people come and present. So a SIDBI comes and talks about the scheme, talks about how you can meet them, and we are seeing changes. They are setting up cells to help entrepreneurs. The MSME ministry has been doing steps. So a number of companies have also started trying to report how much of business are they taking from small and medium enterprise, which is indirectly also promoting this drive towards getting small and medium enterprise to get more contracts from private enterprise, which is turning out to be a good initiative, because when now you go in the solar space, you have a number of medium enterprises saying, I can provide the solution, and somewhere in a large corporate he says, oh God, I need to give him that additional points, I'm not doing enough procurement from small and medium enterprise. So it is percolating. There are various initiatives. We, like all good things, we want them faster. So
Sure.
That's clearly something we need to do.
Usha, can I take this on and talk to you as, while you are a development financier, but for a moment if I ask you to take on the hat of an investor, there is a very clear statement from Ashish that investors, might have money, but we also know they're not investing, but they might want to invest, but beyond that they bring nothing. We have a view from Satish that these entrepreneurs are not equipped. Some of the entrepreneurs are not equipped. What I hear is a gap which is easily bridgeable. Is there some possibility that developmental institutions take on the role of actually galvanizing investors who have the money but not the skills to understand what the other side need, actually bring over their skills, right? For example, some of the programs which Satish mentioned, which are run by the government, which are available in the system, but entrepreneur cannot access because of lack of skills. Can investors not be trained to fill these skills? Or is the problem going to be always this gap that investors will have the money but won't want to get into operations, and entrepreneurs may not have the skills and therefore will always lack this capital availability for their business? Is there some program, is there any bridging or a technical training available for investors to sort of reach out and provide these skills maybe I'm not able to define the question correctly. It cannot be a technical training, but there is a gap which is identified. There are investors who have such skills, particularly development institutions can play this role. So why do you think this gap is continuing? Why do we not see the two sides reaching out to each other and offering complementary skills in these areas?
If I understood the question correctly, let me try and respond. Well, I think, yes, there are two sides to the whole issue here. There's one where you have entrepreneurs who may not necessarily have the right skills to access investment, and I think on the other side you have funds available, but then there are not the
There are people to bring those skills to these entrepreneurs.
To reach
those
out,
funds.
Of course, from development institution, especially from KFW's point of view, I think we do not fund individual projects. So obviously, we have to find an intermediary. That's totally a different way of operating. So we definitely want someone like IREDA or REC or NABARD, as an institution which channels our funds. But for a moment, if I just, as you said, if I forget about it if I talk about this gap, I think this gap, as you have very rightly put it yourself, that it's not a technical training that one can really impart. These are skills which comes with experience, and probably from failures, I would say, or from, having knocked the doors of the investors many times and learning the whole processes, and that I think probably varies from one situation to another.
Yeah.
Because if you really talk, say in one particular state, maybe the agency which deals might be very progressive and might be very good, and on at the other level you will actually be interacting with a person within the agency who may not be really cooperative at all. So I think it's such a complex thing that I don't know how to put it in a curricula to be able to say that, okay, development institutions or others could actually bridge this gap. But it's very true that some of these investments are driven by subsidies, subsidies or incentives, or you may call, maybe there may be a number of schemes that are there. But on the other hand, if you really talk to the agencies which are implementing the schemes, they would say that, oh, we have funds available, but nobody is coming. So, that's also an issue, because you have funds available, but then there are not enough takers for the fund. So somewhere I think somewhere I think all this actually relates to the scale issue, and also the skill that Satish talked about, that skill that is required to access those funds which are available, to really interact with those the government agencies and other banks and other institutions, and I think that skill base, along with the scale, I think those are the two that would really drive this. So there is definitely a fundamental issue here as to how to structure this kind of capacity building.
But I think what successfully you as a panel have done is bring to very clear relief today what the issues are. There are obviously clearly issues with the investors, they have the capital, but not the capacity to go down to the sustainable level of investments. In your opinion, there are issues with investors, as brought out by you as a panel, where the investees and the entrepreneurs lack the skill to identify and access capital for their projects. There are some very pertinent points which you made, Ashish, that you feel investors, where they bring capital, do not mind of being, such a fantastic concept which is well defined. There are principles very clearly laid down globally for sustainable investing. There are several funds who have signed on to these principles at the last count. The PRI claims that they have $1 trillion of capital signed on with them in terms of their signed on to these principles of investing, but somehow this capital does not seem to materialize into projects, particularly in our market. So I think the fundamental issue which we brought onto the table is, where are the gaps, what are these gaps, and as Usha very rightly said in her concluding statement, that some of these gaps cannot be solved with institutional frameworks. These will need to be solved at individual level by entrepreneurs, by investors reaching out to each other. There is no clear-cut solution available, at least with this panel today, to solve these problems. But I think the fundamental problem we've done is why we've brought to very clear relief that why investments are not happening. With this, I'd like to turn over to the floor.
Okay, I happened to attend a social entrepreneurship course out of curiosity. Now, like the 5 days were spread around, they were inviting various entrepreneurs as well as investors who gave us an insight into, again, the same kind of discussion also happened there. Now, what we realized over there was some of the qualitative aspects of a social entrepreneur. For example, as Joseph pointed out over here, that bringing a smile on a person's face, something like that cannot be quantified. Now, if something like that is taken into account by an investor, like, okay, I've been able to make a difference in so many lives, then that can be taken as an input when they consider the return on investment, not purely the quantifiable part. So this is one additional point maybe like the advisors here or the investors here can probably consider. The other thing what that particular the course highlighted was that ultimately at the end of the day it is purely profit. So for example, Facebook is also a social enterprise. Because you are connecting so many people across the world, and the rise in the Middle East and the people approving the government out there also is again a social unrest that happened. Now, how did Facebook, someone, an entrepreneur, he came up with an idea, but he did not know how to sell the idea. So the folk from Napster walks in and he helped him create a business case, and which helped him finally to get investors from people. So ultimately, it is whether it's a normal business or a socially relevant business, you'll need to have, as the panels also here rightly pointed out, you need to have both these skill sets. It has to be a balance. So I agree with some of the points, and maybe taking a look at the qualitative aspects would definitely help a social entrepreneur like him going forward. Thank you.
Very pertinent comments. Can we go to the lady at the end?
Hi, Kim from Nirman. I have a question, but I'll quickly comment on a point you made. I hear frequently this, how can you measure a smile thing? And it's actually something my friend does. So I'll argue that as opposed to how can you measure a smile, we do that. So it is possible to quantify it. It's very difficult, but it is possible. And I'll say to also think of it like this, maybe not how do you measure it, but why is the person smiling? So, if the person's smiling because they got a lollipop from someone in the village versus a program actually working, it's another way to think about it. But my question is, capacity building is a really big buzzword these days, and we touched upon some programs that seem to be working. But if there are any other specific examples of things that are working or areas we know are really deficient, if you have any other ways to elaborate on that, I'd be interested.
Satish, you'd like to start, and then maybe Usha and Unmesh.
Okay, as has been the theme, I'll rather first start with the smile. See, there's a lot that has happened with regards to trying to quantify aspects which are more than just the dollar and the rupee figure on the Excel sheet. So one such example was the market called the carbon market, in which you know, we've spent a long time.
Everybody's smiling right now.
No, they're crying right now. Okay, so it's the smile before the cry. So see, this measuring or putting up a quantitative measure to quite a few of these qualitative aspects is something that has been important in all of these investments. And a number of these funds that are investing in this sector are trying to figure out their roadmap by saying, instead of how do I measure these smile equivalent, can I measure it by finding out, am I, being water neutral, am I reducing emissions? So the cook stove players, the solar lantern players are all keen. The biomass-based power players were also measuring their social returns by parameters like this. A good element of this was to take this forward to create a market-based mechanism, and that's how the whole carbon credit market came into being. We are now looking at another market called the renewable energy certificate market also, which is coming up, and it's not long before we have a market which says, for example, measures water credits. We're already talking about a SOx and NOx based market in India, all of which will turn to, measuring these investments by parameters which make more sense to the bankers and can be quantitatively given some value. A big challenge with all of these markets is once again going back to regulation and how to keep the market structure in a way to prevent it from collapsing. Whether it be the REC markets overseas, like in Australia, where 2 attempts have been made at the REC market, it continues to exist, but in each attempt, they realized that a form of instrument which they did not expect came into being, and therefore the market reached a point where the prices ran down almost to zero. So clearly, creating a market mechanism to measure these qualitative aspects using credits has been something which is being tried, is being tested, it has not yet been perfected. It's something that is work in progress, and I think that will significantly change the way investing is done, because it will create a very clear, simple number which can be put into these Excel sheets. So like we're doing carbon credits and we're doing emission reduction, many of these attributes may come into being. So that was the smile part of it. Now, coming back to capacity building and what's happening on the capacity building front, I think lots is happening on the capacity building front. At least that is one area where, with regards to social enterprise, there is a lot of interaction happening. Like this event where we're doing a lot of discussion on this, there are multiple areas where we're seeing bottom of pyramid in C.K. Prahlad's theory, and the amount of action that is happening with regards to that is significant. On various forums, people are discussing, trying to find opportunities, trying to find the size and scale of market opportunities. So,
Could you name a few specific one? That was her question.
you are looking
Or
at...
you want to talk to her separately later on and
Okay, because I think I'll talk to you separately, because I'm trying to figure out whether you're looking at capacity building in terms of programs or in terms of institutions which are contributing to it. So I think we can have this discussion. Yeah.
Does KFW have any specific capacity building programs in these areas? Are there any thoughts around this which are being worked on?
Well, basically we have what we call as the accompanying measures, which is the TA. We don't call it as a technical assistance, but accompanying measures to any credit line that we provide to any institution. So the accompanying measures is basically to develop capacities with regard to that particular sector's...
That's probably to train the institutions to recognize the smile part of the business, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Umesh, have you come across in course of your working in this area some specific programs?
Yes and no. Yes, because yes, there are lots of forums which are out there, but I think instead of demystifying scenarios, they end up confusing each other. So an investor would try and confuse the investee company with their jargon and vice versa. So I think that's what needs to stop immediately, because there is no point. I mean, I've sat on so many deals, and in fact my job has been to decongest both the investee and the investor in terms of what they're thinking, because I happen to, out of my own practice over the last 2 decades or so, know both sides of the coin, so to speak. So I think the idea is to try and arrive at what are the common features on which profit can be measured, social impact can be delivered. And I think to a large extent, what I'm trying to say is, and quite honestly and candidly, is that there's a lot of self-professed knowledge floating around, that if I'm a legendary investor and I've invested in Silicon Valley in IT companies, perhaps I would come and apply the same yardstick to somebody who is creating a biogas plant. So I think that's where the biogas person will be struggling in a very futile way to figure out what is it which is going wrong, but it doesn't really get to that point. So I think a lot of demystification required. There's a lot of a genuine understanding. And in the social sector, this happened. What was participatory research? Why did it evolve? It meant doing research with the people to understand their problems and then convert that research into a measurable document. Instead of sending a research saying that please research what is it happening on the ground. So participatory research is a fantastic milestone in the social sector. You need a participatory due diligence to happen in the private equity and social venture funding sector.
Mic here, please, if it's possible.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Manoj. Actually, I missed your session, but just looking at the topic and whatever has been discussed, a thought I'm sharing, a point probably to ponder. Now, many corporates, they do have their CSR funds.
Right.
They have a lot of money going into the social causes, and they propagate. There are some very good corporate citizens across, and they invest in the larger issues. But the thought which I'm going to put is it happens in pockets. Like few companies in their zone of influence, they are doing something. And as India as a whole, there are a number of issues like take some basic needs. Forget about anything very hi-fi, drinking water, portable, clean portable drinking water. How many villages across India, they do not have simple access to clean potable drinking water? Electricity. There are so many, the list can go on. Now, if maybe a common platform, instead of industries doing their, to an extent it is marketing also by the companies. I mean, when they are doing CSR initiatives, nothing to take away from them, but to an extent there's a problem.
We all know the incidents of greenwashing.
There's probably a hidden agenda there, like the name, the visibility, all these factors count. So maybe a common corpus at maybe a country level, and all the corporates contributing to that, and from a central body, all these issues are addressed.
Let me try and answer you there, though you said you're making a statement.
I'm not posing a question, I'm
you're
just
not
saying.
posing a question, but let me try and address that.
Yeah.
I think there was a session yesterday talking about introduction of a new law, which is talking about companies setting aside a part of their profits to work in the sustainability area. I don't know what the conclusions are, but it's been an extremely controversial move. Nobody is happy at the idea of being forcibly asked to set aside a part of their money. Voluntary CSR, whether it can be put into a common platform or not, it's challenging.
Clarify, I'm not saying that it should be made compulsory. I'm not at all saying that. It's of course a voluntary initiative. What I'm saying is whomsoever is voluntarily contributing, it happens in pockets, like a company is, suppose they all contribute to a common body, and that common body then addresses issues at large.
There is a clean energy fund lying with Government of India, which it collects by putting a cess on coal. There's about close to $1.6 billion lying with the government for collected over the last 2 years. They haven't yet figured out what to do with that money.
Well, let's all go there and...
I hope that answers your question, that collecting money with a central body, with the government, I don't know whether it solves a problem or creates a new one.
My point was not collecting money, my point was to channelize.
I understand what you're saying. It's a noble thought, but involving the government anywhere in this country...
I'm not saying it needs to be a government body. It can be a foundation, maybe
possibly.
Any corporate can have this foundation. We'll have some, the intellects and the policy makers on board. There's a board of directors of that, something like that.
Sure.
Just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you. I will take 2 questions now because we have the next forum awaiting to come here. Next panel waiting to come here. Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question about SRI funds in general, and I was just curious, what criteria must an enterprise fulfill to be vetted for a typical fund? And then how do you ensure adherence to that criteria, and also who selects it? And I understand that might be kind of hard to answer like more generally, but if you know like a specific fund that you're familiar with, that could work as well.
Vish, you want to talk about, you mentioned Acumen, is there?
Sure. So I'll just give a brief insight because the whole list of environmental, social, governance indicators are quite comprehensive and complex to discuss in this forum. I can talk to subsequently after the session. But every fund which has an environmental, social, governance filter in place will try and look at either the company getting listed with, let's say, the FTSE for Good index, which is a responsible index globally. In India, it did not work out. The CRISIL ESG index didn't almost have any products being created on the back of it, which was unfortunately sad. But funds will look at where are the reporting, auditing, and materiality questions being answered in terms of environmental, social, and related indicators, and these indicators keep on getting added. So for example, 10 years ago, if I'm a fund manager, I would essentially look at rights of indigenous populations if it was oil and gas company. So it's context sensitive, it's issue sensitive. I would not necessarily look at violation of human rights, which today I will, because the UN has principles of supporting human rights also in place. So it's a continuously evolving scenario, and like I said earlier, if you decide to apply all ESG filters, not that they exist, but you decide to theoretically, you wouldn't have a fund investing into anything. So you are trying to hedge your risk by trying to build as much as you can in terms of potential plus brownie points on the environmental, social, and governance fronts into your investment decision-making process. And each fund would use a different, helping poor farmers who grow tobacco, supply it to the tobacco company. It's fine then for some of them because they're working across the supply chain. So it's subjective, but the hope is as it moves forward, you will have some semblance of a really good metric in place.
The final question, please, if you can take this. I request you to interact directly with the panelists.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kiran Shaya, and my company iDobro provides market access and linkages to women, social and green enterprises. One of the resounding words that you always hear in impact investing is obviously scale. Yeah, and for scale, obviously business development is a prerequisite. However, the minute you ask someone, do you have a marketing budget? Are you going to do something to actually promote and engage and build awareness? It is immediately no. And my question is, in technical assistance, TA is a term again that resounds, and we constantly talk about it, whether it's as accompanying measures or what, but somehow marketing doesn't figure there. So I'm just trying to, if someone can demystify it for me and understand better.
Would you like to, Usha?
As I said, the accompanying measures that we have been deploying along with the credit lines, it definitely allows marketing of a particular scheme which is evolving out of the institution, specifically promoting financing under the credit line. So marketing in that sense, yes, it is definitely part of the accompanying measures that are supported. If I
very institution to institution specific. Clearly there are some institutions where you have interacted who do not count marketing as part of their TA. So I would suggest you go to KFW and try your luck now next time. Okay, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure working with you as an audience. And thank you very much, panel members. And with this we can bring this session to an end.